you've seen some rather strange items on the French chef. We've had, for instance, a buffalo iron. And we've had a great German masher. And we've also had grandmother's mandolin, which she uses for slicing potatoes. And now we have a heating pad, and we're going to use it to make croissants today on the French chef. Welcome to the French chef. I'm Julia Child. We're going to make French croissants today, and this is what they look like. It's a crescent roll, and they're used in France mostly for the continental breakfast or petit déjeuner. And they're lovely, buttery, flaky, tender, delicious things. And they're awfully good not only for breakfast, but for lunch and for dinner. And I like them for a mid-morning snack or mid-afternoon or midnight. I just love croissants because, well, I think anyone who's eaten them loves them too. And what they are is just a yeast dough or a bread dough, which is rolled in a special way with butter and then formed into croissants and baked. And so we might as well get to the dough right now, which is a yeast dough. And with this, I like to use this dry, active yeast, which comes in a package, and you don't have any trouble about having it go stale, as long as you're very careful to notice the date on the back of the package, and don't use it if the date has run out. But it works, I think, awfully well and very fast, and we have to dissolve the yeast in some hot water. So I'm going to use my instant boiling water so I can get hot water fast and then cool it off a little bit. It says on the package that it should be heated at about 105 degrees, and you can tell with your finger that it should be fairly warm but not too warm. And for each one package, we want 1/4 cup of warm water. So I'll put that into my other cup and then just tear open the package and sprinkle the yeast right on top. And then we want to prove the yeast, which means that we want to prove that it really is active, whether or not it says so in the package. You want to make sure that it's going to do its work. And to help it prove itself, you have to feed it something. First, a little bit of salt, about 1/8 of a teaspoon, and then it has to have a little bit of sugar, because if it doesn't have something to feed on, it may not feel that it's worth growing. So it takes about 5 minutes for that to foam up, and you'll see how it does foam. And we also going to have some tepid milk. And we want about 1/2 cup of milk. And we just want to heat that again until it's warm to the finger. And the best way to test out all of these things is to put your finger in as soon as it's heated for a moment. There, that's warm to the finger, so I'll just turn the heat off. And we're now ready for the flour. And for this, to make 12 croissants, we want 2 cups of flour. And you don't need to measure the flour for this at all. You just dip your 1 cup measure into your container or bag and level it off and into a mixing bowl. And then we have to also have some more food for the croissants, so we want a tablespoon of sugar. This is food again for the yeast to grow on, and 1.5 teaspoons of salt. There's 1 teaspoon, and there is 1/2 teaspoon. And then we want some oil. And how much oil to add depends on what kind of flour you use. If you're using the regular white bleached all-purpose flour that comes in a sack, the kind that you usually get, you would want 4 tablespoons of oil. But I'm using my own special blend of flour, which is 1 part all-purpose flour and 2 parts pastry flour, and both of them unbleached. If you have a good grocery store, you can get this kind of flour. And for this mixture of mine, I just want 2 tablespoons of oil, and the kind of oil you use is a tasteless salad oil, and the object of the oil is just to make your dough a little more tender. And then we put in the milk, and we take a look at the yeast to see how that's doing. You can see now it's foaming up, and that means that it has proved to our satisfaction that it is active. And you always want to do that with yeast just to make sure. Otherwise, you could go to all your mixture and then wait, and nothing would happen. So in goes we had 2 cups of flour and 1/2 cup of milk and 2 tablespoons of oil in this. And if you were using your all-purpose flour, you would use 4 tablespoons of oil. And then mix it all up. And then we have to knead it. And the reason that you knead it is to develop that property in flour which is known as gluten. And gluten is something that makes the flour, makes your dough rise up and then also hold its shape when it's risen. And this is a little bit sticky now. We don't want too tough a dough. Just get it to gather up all the flour, and then when you have a sticky dough like this, you just lift it up and sort of bang it down. Be very rough. And we just have to knead it long enough so that it won't stick to the hands. You see now, this is supposed to be fairly sticky, and in about a minute or 2 of kneading, it'll gather, the gluten will have worked itself up so that the flour isn't sticky. See what I'm doing? I'm just lifting it up and slapping it down and then gathering it together again. This is the same kind of kneading you have to do when you're making babas and brioche, when you have a sticky dough. Now you see now it's beginning not to stick to my hands. So I can do the kneading by pushing it with the palm of my hand. Now it's practically unsticky. If you find that your dough still remains a little bit too sticky, you can put a little bit more flour on and then continue kneading it a little more. But it has a nice soft consistency. And then it goes into a clean bowl, and you clip the top. And this allows it to rise a little more easily. And then you have the problem of how to rise it. And rising means that it has doubled in bulk. And here's some that we have that's already risen, and it has doubled in bulk. So you see the difference there between this amount and that amount. And it has to double in bulk. It shouldn't over-rise. So the problem is, how are you going to let it rise? It should, in normal times, take about an hour and a half at room temperature to rise. And you have several methods of how to do it. It can take longer than an hour and a half if you would like. For instance, the slowest rising method would be to put it in the refrigerator covered and let it rise overnight, because it will rise under very low temperature. And a more sort of normal way would just leave it at normal room temperature and put your bowl in a plastic bag. Now this trick I learned from an English book called Let's Talk About Yeast. It's a very good book. And it suggested putting the yeast in a plastic bag, and I found that it works extremely well. And this usually rises in an hour and a half. But if you want to have a faster rising,